Welcome to the Net.Touch Plus screencast of the week. My name is Jeffrey Way. I'm your host. And today, this is actually going to be a user request. So about a week or two ago, I created a screencast on how to create a three-level navigation menu. And one of you emailed me and asked if there was a way to build the lava lamp style using jQuery. And it's really simple, as you'll find. But the cool thing is you get a really neat effect. So I went ahead and created a little project. It's on GitHub. You're free to download it. I'll have a link in the tutorial, and you're free to use it or edit it, do whatever you want with it. Let's take a quick look at the finished project. I made it extra big just so you could see, but you see we have just kind of some nice CSS gradients. We have some overflow, and if I hit it, it'll follow me wherever I hover over. And we get some kind of nice easing there. So I can just move and it'll follow me wherever I go. It doesn't matter how wide the list item is, it'll just follow me anywhere. And it's a plugin, so it's also rather flexible where users can adjust the color, of course, and the overflow. By overflow, I mean how much this blue box stretches over the black container. We can change the easing, so if we want it to be more of an elastic where it goes out and then come back in, that's all really easy. So that's what we will build today. If you're interested, keep watching. So let me go ahead and load our blank page, because we always start from scratch. And within here I have a JS folder, empty, and a CSS folder with a blank style.css. So we're all set to get started. Okay, so of course we're going to create a div with an ID of container, and within it, let's say we're going to have our UL, and let's give it an ID of nav. Now within here, we're going to have a handful of list items. So why don't we create, let's say 5, and each one will have an anchor. And you know what, I forgot to give these values. Let's go ahead and give this one home, and these are all just gibberish. About, blog. And let's do one longer so we know that that it's adjusting to the width properly. And then the final one is maybe contact. And then finally, we need to, like you see with most navigation menus, have a way to target the current page, right? So let's assuming the current page is home. Let's give it an ID of selected. And then when you would go to another page, the ID of selected would be applied to about or blog or etc. And that should be good. That should be just fine. So let's go back into Firefox, refresh the page, and we have our navigation. So we're not going to do too much HTML here at all, but we do need to import some scripts. We're going to be working with jQuery 1.4. So we will import that. And next step, give me just a moment, hide file browser, that's better. And the next step is we will import jQuery UI. Now we're not going to import much here, we're just going to import jQuery UI core, and this gives us access to some specialized easing and sliding properties. So that should be good. So we have our navigation and we have 2 scripts, and the final thing is we need to create a plugin, right? So let's go to JavaScript folder and create a new file. I'm going to call this jQuery spastic nav is what I gave it, .js. Just spastic meaning it just kind of be all over the place. So the last thing we got to do is import that file. Script type equals text / JavaScript, and the source is js/jQuery.spasticnav.js, and we should be all set to get started. And that's really all the markup we're going to do. Pretty simple. So the next step is to go into our JavaScript file and get started. But one last thing, we need to figure out how are we going to call this. It always helps me when I do this. So I want to simply be able to call my navigation menu and then just call the name of the plugin, Spastic Nav. And that's it. And if I want, I can pass in an object literal and add some overrides. Let's think about the kind of overrides that we would like to have. Well, like I said, coming back to our demo, we'd like to be able to set the amount of overlap of that little blob. So it can be really overlap or can be right within the box. So we're going to have an option for overlap. How fast do we want the little blue blob to follow us? We're going to set a speed. A reset, and a reset is, let's go back Unfortunately, I've already closed it. Let's go back to GitHub. Sorry about that. Let's go back. And we want to have a reset because let's say they hover over to contact. Well, if they decide not to go there, the page is going to show them as being on contact, and we don't want that. So I've set a reset, or you could have it immediately go back to home as soon as they mouse off. I decided to keep it there for 2 seconds, and then it'll go back to the page that you're currently on. And I'm going to refer to that as reset. And let's see what other options. You can be as flexible as you want. We don't have to, but we can apply a color so they can quickly change from that blue color that we have to purple or whatever. And then finally, I want to give the user the option to select the easing, whether they want it linear or ease out, elastic, or an expo, anything like that. But for now, we're going to do this simple call, and this alone should make it work for whoever is using our plugin. Good deal. So now I'm going to hide the file browser, and we are ready to get started with our plugin. So the first step is, and hopefully if you're watching you've created one before, but if not, that's okay. We're creating a self-executing anonymous function, and we're going to pass jQuery to that. So this allows us to use a dollar symbol without worrying about it interfering with any other JavaScript libraries. This is pretty standard. The next step is, and you know what, let me clean that up. There we go. Okay, the next step is to create our plugin. So it's going to be jQuery.prototype.spastic. We're calling it spastic nav. This can be whatever we want to call it, and that's going to be equal to a function. And we are going to give the option of the user to override it. So if they do pass in the object literal to override it, that's going to be represented by options. Okay, and the next step is we will do return this.each is going to be a function. So for every item that they pass in, we will run something. So remember, they could be calling spastic nav on maybe a class where there's 5 items in the jQuery object. So we need to be sure that we go over each one. That way it'll work. And we return it to make sure that we have the ability to do spastic nav and then continue chaining, like so. But first thing, let's go ahead and create our options. So let's do options equals jQuery.extend. Like so, and we said we were going to give the overlap. Right now I'm going to set that to about 20 pixels by default, but we can change that if we want. Speed, how quickly do we want it to come? This is mostly just kind of playing around with it. I came to about ½ a second, felt nice and fluid to me. Reset, we could do, let's do around 2.5 seconds, right around there. And color, by default, OB2B61. Okay, and easing. The easing by default is going to be set to, and it's called ease out expo. And this isn't something we're creating. This is available to us thanks to the easing plugin, which was added to jQuery UI. So unless you're importing jQuery UI core, this is not going to work, in which case you would want to do something more just like a swing, a standard swing easing. And now what we need to do here is what's jQuery.extend? Well, these are our default options, but we want to give the user the ability to override those. So we're going to extend this object, and it's going to override what we currently have. So I know this is a little confusing if you're new to jQuery. We're going to take whatever the user passes in, represented by this options. We're going to overwrite that options variable, and we're going to take anything the user passes in and override our current settings. So if they set right here, overlap equals 50, something like that, then that would be represented within options. It would go here and it would override any of the properties, in this case overlap, with their setting and apply it back into this options object. So let's go ahead and go back a few steps. And that should be just fine. You can add more to your options. It's just a matter of how flexible you want to be. This should be good for our needs, though. Okay, the next step is we will create some variables. So we will do, and another good thing to do is just to alert to make sure that it is being called. I do this a lot. So let's go into here, and we're going to close that out and refresh the page, and we get the alert so we know that our plugin is being called correctly and we're ready to get started. So let's create some variables. Nav is going to be a reference to this. This is going to refer to right here. In this case, it'll refer to the UL nav. The next step is current page item. And the reason I'm doing this is it's going to be equal to get selected, and we could also make this an option. Once again, being as flexible as we want, we're assuming the user is going to add an ID of selected. So we could add a new option of, if we wanted, current page item, and make that equal to selected by default. And then, if we wanted to give the user more flexibility, we could reference current page item. I'm not going to worry about that, just because this is a simple plugin, mostly for me, so it doesn't have to be too flexible. So we are going to get the selected item. We're basically looking for the page that's currently selected right here. And we're going to get that, but we want to set a context as well, so it doesn't have to search the entire DOM for that. We only want it to search the UL. So I'm going to set nav or this as the context. Next, I'm going to create a variable called blob. That's going to be the little blue, I didn't know what to call it, the little blue blob that follows your cursor. We're not going to set it just yet, but because all variables are hoisted to the top, it makes sense just to go ahead and do that up here. And then another one is going to be the reset variable. So don't worry if that's confusing, all of that will be explained shortly. All right, so now we're going to create a new list item, and this is going to be our little blue blob, for lack of better words. So li, I'm going to give it an ID of blob. Or if you want, you can do it more in the jQuery way where you set the attribute or you pass a object literal as a second parameter. I think this is just going to be fine for this case. So list items, and let's set some CSS to it though. The CSS, and the reason we aren't adding a class is because we're going to have to use jQuery to determine the values, so we have to set it in here. First one is going to be the width, and I want that equal to current page item. Remember, that's going to be equal to this list item right here, and I want to get the width of that. So, but not just the width, I want to get the width including any padding and borders. That way it can be a little more flexible. So we're going to get outer width. The next step is, whoops, how'd that happen? The next step is going to be height, and once again, it's going to be current page item dot outer height, once again including padding and borders. But remember, we want to give a little bit of overlap where it overflows the navigation box. So I'm going to take that value and add options.overlap. So if this returns 400 or something, we're going to take 400 and add options.overlap to equal 420. The next step is we need to specify its current position, because if blog is selected, we need to make sure that this new list item that we create, its left value is equal exactly to where this blog begins. That way it looks like it's hovering over it. And we use the left property for that. And we will do current page item. And the way we can grab the value of the current page item is we're going to use the position that was added into jQuery. And we're going to get left. So whatever the value the left property is from its nearest ancestor, we're going to get that value and make that the left value of blog. But remember, if you want to edit positioning of an element, it needs to have a positioning context. We will go ahead and do that within our style sheet though. And then the final step is, actually we have two more. Top is once again current page item dot position, as you would guess, dot top. And we're going to this one's a little bit different because we want the overlap to be vertically centered. So we need to make sure that it overlaps on each side. Otherwise, this is a little hard to explain. Otherwise, the overlap would be, in this case, 20 pixels on the bottom. There would just be 20 extra pixels below. But we don't want that. We want 10 pixels above the navigation and 10 pixels below. Hopefully that makes sense. So the way we will get that is its top value is going to be equal to minus options.overlap divided by 2, in which case top would be the current position minus 10, and that way it'll work. And then finally, background color, and this is totally for just ease. It's not even necessary. They can do it from their style sheet. And it's going to be equal to options.color. In this case, that's that blue value that we set. And that looks pretty good. And then we're going to append that to nav. Okay, so create a new list item, give it some CSS values, and add it to the navigation menu. Let's see if that's working now. Refresh the page, and we're going to open up Firebug. Let's go ahead and enable. Okay, and we do have two mistakes. Spastic nav is not a function, and that's because we have an unterminated string literal .append to, and I forgot to close that. Thank God for Firebug. And options.color. All these mistakes. There we go. Try it again. Okay, and now you can see, if I go into HTML, you can see it's added that for us. So we have div container, UL, and now we've added, and I called that blog instead of blob. So we'll fix that, but we have LID blob, and it just doesn't have any value. So LID is blob. But now we know it's working, and the reason the positioning is like that is we haven't done any CSS, we haven't set a positioning context or anything like that. But now we're doing well. So the next step is we've created this blob, but I don't want to have to traverse the DOM every time I want to access it. So we've already created the blob variable above, so now we're just going to set a value to it. So blob equals jQuery blob, but once again, search within nav. Okay, and I keep calling it blob. That should be good. So the next step is get all list items within nav, and when they are hovered over, we're going to run a function, and when they're hovered off, we'll run another function. Alert hovered. Let's test that. Refresh. Hover over one, and we get 2 errors. Let's find out what these are. Illegal characters. Take just a moment. Pound. I'm making all these mistakes today. Sorry. Okay. Hover over it, and now we get the alert. Try it one more time. Yeah, now it's working. So now when we hover over it, we can adjust the positioning of the blobs. It's really quite easy. So when you hover over it, we're going to do blob.animate, and the left property is going to be equal to, and you know what, we're going to pass 2 parameters. So the way I'm going to make this a little easier is I'm going to put this on its own line, like so, and I'll explain more in just a moment. Okay, so now this way we can do left, and that's going to be equal to this dot position dot left. So left is equal to this. This is going to be the list item that's hovered over. So whenever you hover over a list item, you get its current left position within the navigation menu, and we set that value to our blob that we created. It's really simple. But also, we need to be careful because the width of each list item is going to be different. So we have to adjust the width of the blob whenever you hover over a new item. So the width is going to be equal to get this dot width as well. All right. But now we want to pass in some settings. So with animate, you have a couple options. I could then do the speed and then a callback function. Right, so, or you can pass that as a second parameter as an object literal. So in this case, we'll do duration, and this way it's a little easier to understand, in my opinion. And the duration is going to be equal to whatever we set the speed to right here. Options.speed. The next option is going to be the easing. Once again, thanks to jQuery UI. We're going to use ease out expo, which speeds up and then slowly slows down as it gets there. So options.easing. And queue is false, and that means I don't want the animations to queue up. And that way, if you've ever hovered over a menu and you do it really fast, and then you see maybe if you have a drop down, all the drop downs just cycle even after you've hovered off like 20 times. That's because the animations are queuing up and they're just repeating one after another. I don't want to deal with that, so we're going to set queue to false. You've also seen maybe somebody do something like stop. It's the same kind of effect. Stop the animations, don't queue them. Okay, that looks good to me. So we've got that, and now when they hover off, we're going to do something else. So mouse out, and we'll do another one. So here we're going to call blob, and like I said, you could do blob, you could do stop, something like that, animate. And we will do, here we'll keep it a little bit more simple. We're going to set left equals to this, dot position, dot left. I'll explain why we do that again shortly. Width is going to be this, dot width. And then finally, we're going to set that once again to options, dot speed. Okay. So here we're just resetting to make sure. I had some issues where when you would hover off, it would go to a different item depending on where you hovered off. So this is just, we're going to make sure that we restate exactly where the blob should be located. Okay, next I'm going to, remember how we said when they hover off, we're going to wait a second or two and then go back to the current page item. We will use set timeout for that. So we created that variable reset at the top. We'll do that here, although, you know what, we may not even need that. I'm deciding if we need a variable all the way at the top of this function or if we can just keep it within here. We'll see. We might need to get out of this function, and I think we will. So we'll keep it all the way at the top up here, and then we will set the value here. And we'll say reset equals set timeout. Okay, and options.reset. That's going to be equal to how long we want it to rest before it goes back to the main menu, to the current page item. I have about 2.5 seconds. We could even do that like second half. We don't even necessarily need to do this at all, but we will. And we will do after 1.5 seconds, blob.animate. And we're going to set the width, once again, current page item dot outer width. And the left value, I did that last time. And the left value is going to be equal to dot position, once again, dot left. And options, mostly we're just repeating ourselves. It's just the way we get the values again. So once again, set timeout. After, in this case, 1.5 seconds, we're going to blob animate, and we're going to bring it back to the currently selected page, and we're going to reset its width and its left value to make sure that it's set to the current page item and not the item that they last hovered over. And that should be it. This is a really simple plugin. Let me make sure I don't have any mistakes here. Okay, so that looks pretty good. We can go over this, see if there's any Firebug errors, refresh the page. Okay, and I think we should be okay with that. The final thing we want to do is, let's say the user hovers over a menu and then they hover off. Okay, as soon as they hover off, we are going to set a timeout and we're going to animate it. But let's say they hover off and then 0.5 seconds later they hover back over an item and they continue going to a different page. That's still not going to cancel the set timeout. So if they are hovering over that menu, as soon as options.resets reaches 1.5 seconds, it's going to immediately go back to the current page, even if they're hovered over it. So we need to find a way to say, if you are hovering over a list item, make sure that you remove this interval, because we want to cancel it, so to speak. And the way we'll do that is when you hover over it, we're going to call clear timeout reset. And that is why we assigned set timeout to a variable. We didn't have to, but by setting it to a variable, we can then target that current set timeout instance, so to speak, and we can clear it and get rid of it. Okay? But then as soon as they mouse off, it's going to set it again. And once again, this is why we created this variable all the way up here. Because if we created var resets down here, we wouldn't have access to that at all from up here, thanks to scope. So we need to make sure that we declared it all the way up here, like so. So I think that should be pretty good for our project. Let's go ahead and comment this out, and yeah, that looks pretty good. So now the next step is to create some styling for our project. So we're not going to do much here, but if you want to see some fun CSS stuff, we'll do that. Container, that's our wrapping. Width is 1200 pixels. Margin is going to be 100 pixels on the top and auto on the left and right. Okay. The next step is we're just going to do a very minor reset here of our UL and our list items just to make sure nothing confuses us. There you go. Next step is blob. We're going to set the background, and I'm going to set the same value that we set in the JavaScript file, but we don't have to. And the next one is border. Right is 1 pixel solid, 0059 EC. And you probably won't be able to see that, but it's just a lighter shade of blue all the way over there. Nothing too vital. Border left is going to be 1 pixel solid and the exact same value. And if I hover over back, you should be able to see it if I zoom in. Hopefully just a lighter shade of blue on the edges. All right, the next step is, remember I said we have to set a position in context if we want to be able to edit its values. So we've done so. The next step is z-index. I want to make sure that we set a z-index of 1, and I'll explain why shortly. And I'm going to set the top to 0. And we're setting top to 0 right now because its nearest ancestor that's positioned is the window. It's going all the way to the top. So for instance, if I set bottom, whoops. Okay, let's try to do this. Sorry about that. Let's go ahead and set nav. I forgot to do this. Position to relative. And now we've set a new positioning context, and now it's going to work. Next step, background. I'm going to give the nav a background of a blackish color, and I'm going to get it to float to the left. And the reason I'm doing that is it's called shrink wrapping. So if you want, we'll get rid of that just for a moment. We'll say nav li, float all of them to the left, make sure that they have no list styles associated with them, and set a border right of 4A, 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 and border left. Okay, and let's do a little bit more. We're going to try to apply some values, and you can see we're starting to get that functionality, right? And that's because we set a positioning context and we floated these items to the left. Okay, and now let's do the last bit with our anchor tag. Color, kind of a grayish, it's just kind of my default color, and z-index is 2, and this is important. So to work with z-index, we have to set a positioning context. And now, do you see what happened there? When I was building this originally, I had this problem of, let's close that out. Yeah, I had this problem. So I would hover over it, but the little menu would go over the text, and we didn't want that. So the answer is to make sure that the z-index of the anchor tag that's hovered over is higher than the z-index of the blob. So remember, to work with z-index, make sure that you apply a positioning context, and then simply make sure that your z-index of the blob is as low as it can be, and the anchor tag is higher. And now it'll show through. Okay, the next step is when we hover over, we want to make sure that we set the cursor to pointer, but we really shouldn't have to do that. So I'm going to get rid of that. The next step is we're going to float that one to the left as well. And we will set a font size. Let's set it around 30 pixels. We're going to make a big menu here. And font family, Helvetica, Arial, sans serif as a backup. Always good to add a backup. Text decoration is none. I don't want them to be underlined. So now you can see we're starting to get this functionality. At this point, it's just a matter of styling it. And here's a big key, set a padding. 30 pixels on the top and bottom, and 45 pixels on the left and right to give it a lot of breathing room. I'm going to zoom out. Now you can see. Starting to look much better already. And we need to do a little bit more though. I'm going to go back to this blob, and we need to work a little bit more. So I'm going to set the background color. And the background by default is, we already did that. So we'll take that, copy it here, but now we're going to add a little more background for gradients. So let's do this. Let's go back to our project and show file browser and go ahead and paste this in. We don't want to lose it. Refresh the page, and now, and the reason was when this blue box wasn't as tall as it should be, it's because we had already loaded the page, the JavaScript had already run, and it had already set the height of this blob equal to what it was at the time, and then we changed it, but we needed a page refresh in order to see the differences. So right now you can already see it's working just fine. If I hover over one, and you see how it speeds up, and then as it slowly reaches its destination, it slows down. That's that ease out expo. So if you want, we could say, let's override this, and we're going to say, and if you ever forget, you can just go to the top and check easing. Let's say easing and ease out elastic. I think that's one. Refresh the page, and that should go over. Yeah. And that's a little way too much for my taste. But you could change the speed as well. So speed, make it take 2 seconds to reach its destination. Like so. So you have a lot of flexibility here. I like the one that we currently have set, so I'm going to keep it like this. But we still need to do some more work. So I'm going to go back, and now we're going to add some fun CSS gradients. So background, let's take care of Firefox first. Moz linear gradient, and it's going to go from the top, and it's going to go from this value right here. And we're going to go down to just a lighter shade, 1153CO, or maybe a darker shade. Zoom in. Yeah, and now you can see it goes from dark to a lighter shade. So if you need an example, if I were to go from that color to red, you would see that way. Let's go back, and I like what we have, and we're going to keep that simple. So now WebKit needs something different. So background, WebKit, gradient, and the type of gradient is going to be linear. It's going to go from 0, 0, basically the left and the very top, to the left side all the way to the bottom. And it's going to go from, and we're just going to paste these values in. So the syntax is slightly different, but it's still really easy. From that color to, and you can also add color stops. You can do a lot of fun stuff. To that color. And you're not going to see any difference here because that's only going to apply to WebKit engine, so Safari and Chrome. But that should be good. And then finally, let's do a little bit more. Let's set, while we're working with CSS3, Moz border radius is 4 pixels. Do the same thing for WebKit. Obviously, that's going to make some rounded corners, like you can see right here. Let's zoom out. You can see it's already starting to look more like a real menu. And it just follows us wherever we go. Pretty cool. And then finally, I'm going to add a box shadow. 2 pixels from the left. We're going to push the shadow to the right 2 pixels, to the bottom 3 pixels, and I want the blur to be 10 pixels, and it's going to be 0, 1, 1. I find it's generally not best to do just a solid black color because that doesn't occur in nature. It's usually going to be shades of a certain color or shades of the current color. So this is a dark blue. And if I zoom in, you can see our shadow. That could very well be too much for you. This was mostly just to have fun, but kind of looks neat. And finally, and by the way, if you want to make that lesser, you can bring down the blur to 5, bring down that to 0, do whatever you want with it. And then finally, we have to, of course, take care of WebKit as well, unfortunately. And luckily, other than gradients, WebKit and Mozilla are pretty similar. So all I need to change is Moz to WebKit. So that looks pretty good. The final thing I think we need to do is set the background color. And watch what happens when I change float. That shows up. So it doesn't make any sense, does it? Why would adding float left suddenly make a background color appear? It's pretty simple. I've explained this so many times in recent screencasts. Check this out. We have our navigation, and by the way, if you understand this, feel free to skip ahead 45 seconds. We have float left on every list item. So every child of our navigation is being floated. And when you float an element, you kind of take it out of its normal positioning, out of the flow of the document. So in this case, if you take every child of the navigation out of the flow of the document, or of the navigation, it's not going to take up any space at all, right? So if I wanted, I could like hard code a value, hide 50 pixels to force it to show something like so. Or there's a trick, and people refer to it as shrink wrapping. And you float it, and by floating the parent, it'll force it to contain its children. You'll see other methods overflow hidden, like that. But the advantage when with navigation to using the shrink wrap method is it'll automatically shrink wrap perfectly, so you don't have to find out the specific width. So you see right here how that overflows. If we set it to float left, we don't have to worry about that. It's kind of a neat feature. So let's save that, come back, paste it into our style.css, close that out, refresh the page, and we have a nice looking menu. That'll work just fine. If we come back and we decide we want to add another one, another blog, it'll work just fine. Or maybe not. Let's go back and, I'm sorry, it's because I've set a width to my container, which we don't even have to do that. So, but that looks good. Look at that. You have all the capabilities to override it that you want, and it's pretty neat. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that because that's too much for a menu. And so, in Not Belong at All, you built a really cool lava lamp style jQuery plugin. You learned some cool features using the positioning. You learned how to create an options panel. We did a lot this lesson, and we have a really cool feature. So you're free to use this however you want. If you can improve it, please do. Let me see it. And thank you so much for watching the screencast of the week. Do me a favor, if you guys like NetTuts, always subscribe to our RSS feed. The more subscribers we have, the more money that I can place into paying for higher level authors and higher level tutorials. And also we are available at twitter.com/nettuts. My name is Jeffrey Way, and I will see you next week. See you guys. Bye.